Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating story. How the Rockefeller family completely transformed the very concept of wealth, and in the process basically built the underlying architecture of modern America. We see billionaire names splashed across the news every single day now, right? They dominate the conversation with flashy purchases and space races. But the story we're looking at right now goes way, way beyond simply making a bunch of money. It's actually about an entirely different philosophy of power. Okay, let's think about this contrast for a second. While some wealthy families literally put their names in giant gold letters on absolutely everything they touch, chasing that highly visible wealth like towering skyscrapers, endless headlines, and super yachts, the Rockefellers mastered a much deeper, quieter kind of influence. Their real legacy? It's invisible power. Through private foundations, strategic investments, and incredibly enduring institutions, they built this massive framework that shapes our lives, our health, and our cities without ever demanding our immediate attention. It's kind of crazy, but it's the exact kind of power you probably walk past every single day without even realizing it's there. So, where did this all start? The origins of this quiet influence trace all the way back to the early life of John D. Rockefeller. He was born in 1839 into a really unstable, pretty unpredictable household. And because of that, he became a young man who was utterly obsessed with creating order out of chaos. He started by meticulously tracking every single penny he earned in a ledger. By the 1850s, he was working as a teenage bookkeeper in Cleveland, and he was already learning a vital lesson. Wealth wasn't just about earning money through sheer backbreaking labor. It was about controlling the flow of the money itself. He quickly realized something profound. The people making the really big money, they weren't the ones out there doing the hardest physical work. They were the ones who controlled the systems, right? It wasn't about who could sweat the hardest. It was about who was thinking the smartest and figuring out how to own the choke points of an entire industry. That single profound insight, the idea that systems govern outcomes, well, it changed his life, and frankly, it changed American history forever. He put this exact insight to the ultimate test in the 1860s. The Pennsylvania oil rush was absolutely booming, but the market itself was utterly chaotic. It was completely unpredictable and wildly fluctuating. Fortunes were literally being made in a morning and completely wiped out by nightfall. Men were rushing out in this mad frenzy to physically drill for oil. But Rockefeller, he didn't grab a drill. No. Instead, he saw an opportunity to control that entire chaotic system by stepping back and focusing strictly on the refining process. It was the one bottleneck everyone else had to pass through. So he took that insight and turned it into a relentless, perfectly tuned machine at his company's Standard Oil. Here's how he did it. By standardizing the refining processes and drastically reducing waste, he was able to predictably lower his costs. And of course, lower costs drove higher, much more reliable profits. He then took those profits and used them to finance rapid, aggressive expansion, buying up competitors and driving his costs down even further in this continuous, compounding loop. It wasn't even just a business anymore. It was a self-sustaining engine that created an unstoppable, completely dominant monopoly. But as you might guess, his aggressive tactics made him incredibly controversial. Securing these highly favorable, totally secretive railroad deals and mercilessly pressuring his smaller rivals to either sell to him or get completely crushed, that didn't win him many friends. Newspapers started portraying him as the ultimate symbol of concentrated corporate power. They literally painted him as an octopus with its tentacles wrapping around the entire nation. This sparked a massive nationwide public debate against monopolies, corporate overreach, and the real danger of having too much power resting in the hands of just one man. And the breaking point finally arrived in the year 1911. After years and years of mounting public pressure, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil blatantly violated antitrust law. With that historic decision, the court ordered Rockefeller's massive, unprecedented empire to be completely broken apart into dozens of smaller companies. It was an absolute seismic shift in American business. Now, it looked like a devastating defeat on paper. His life's work was fractured, right? But the financial reality was entirely different. Actually, the government's intervention paradoxically created independent business giants. These new companies were suddenly free to grow and compete, eventually becoming modern titans that we know today, like Exxon and Mobil. And because Rockefeller's ownership stakes in these resulting companies were completely preserved, as they grew, they made his fortune even more incredibly valuable than it was when he controlled the monopoly. Facing this absolute mountain of wealth, Rockefeller had to answer a pretty profound question. Seriously, think about this. What do you actually do when you have more money than you could ever personally spend? We are talking about wealth on a scale that honestly defies human comprehension. And the answer he found to that simple but heavy question would eventually transform American society from the ground up. His answer was philanthropy. But, and this is key, he approached giving away his money with the exact same ruthless systematic business efficiency that he used to build his oil monopoly in the first place. He didn't just casually write checks to charities. He applied a rigorous 5-step method. You find a specific problem, measure its scope, build a dedicated institution to tackle it, create a repeatable process, and then scale the solution massively. It was basically the standard oil efficiency loop all over again, but this time applied to human suffering. That hyper-efficient mindset led to a huge defining moment in 1913. That year marked the creation of the Rockefeller Foundation. Armed with this unprecedented endowment and guided by his really strict principles of scale and measurement, it didn't just act as a standard charity. It quickly became one of the most globally influential philanthropic organizations in human history. Through this foundation, his wealth was actively building society as we know it today. I mean, we're talking about funding critical disease research that literally eradicated illnesses. They established nationwide public health programs, drove agricultural development that fed millions of people, and championed scientific education all across the globe. They even provided the massive financial backing required to build and establish the University of Chicago. This wasn't just giving back, this was literal nation building. And this, right here, was the turning point. The family was no longer just a wealthy oil dynasty tied to the wildly fluctuating price of a single commodity. By building these robust institutions, they were creating structures that would outlive individuals. They were cementing a cultural and scientific influence that would survive, continue to operate, and shape the world long after the original founders were gone. The next generation took that ambitious vision and just completely escalated it. John D. Rockefeller Jr. fundamentally shaped Manhattan's physical and cultural landscape by building the iconic Rockefeller Center. Then you have Nelson Rockefeller, who entered public service at the highest possible levels, becoming the governor of New York and later the U.S. vice president. The family's reach just kept expanding as they dove heavily into international diplomacy and national conservation efforts. They were turning financial wealth into permanent historical legacy. You see, most fortunes simply disappear when the original business declines or, consumer tastes change. But the Rockefellers, they diversified brilliantly. They shifted from controlling a single, vulnerable corporation to influencing an indestructible, highly decentralized network of institutions. Think about it. If the oil market crashed tomorrow, their influence in politics, art, medicine, and education remained completely intact. However, having this immense, quiet influence naturally brings us to a really significant debate, and it's one that remains a defining question of modern society even today. Should private foundations actually be able to influence public policy so heavily? It's a massive question of democratic balance when astronomical private wealth meets public need. So let's look at both sides of this. On one side, critics argue that these massive foundations basically allow wealthy families to shape public priorities, things like education reform or global health policies, without ever being elected by or accountable to the people. But on the other side, supporters are quick to point out that private capital is absolutely necessary to solve critical problems. They argue that governments are just too slow, too bureaucratic, or too politically gridlocked to address urgent crises with the speed and efficiency that a well-funded private foundation can. Regardless of where you personally stand on that debate, the deep lesson we pull from analyzing the Rockefeller model is crystal clear. The absolute most durable form of wealth isn't cash, it's infrastructure. Cash can be spent, it can be taxed, it can be inflated away to nothing, but the physical and organizational systems you build, those become permanently woven into the very fabric of society. Because let's face it, financial capital is inherently fragile. It can be spent impulsively, the underlying company can completely collapse because of one bad quarter, or stocks can lose their value overnight in a market panic. But institutional capital, that can survive and exert major influence for generations. The Rockefellers successfully converted their highly vulnerable financial wealth into permanent institutional capital, embedded across education, science, and politics. Just think about our own daily routines. A student studying at a world-class university, a researcher making breakthroughs in a medical lab, a patient whose life is saved by that modern medical research, or even just a tourist walking through the towering Art Deco plazas of Rockefeller Center. People interact with these vast institutions every single day, often completely unaware of the original 19th century oil fortune that made them all possible in the first place. And that reveals the grand paradox of great wealth. The money itself eventually changes hands, the bank accounts get drained, and the founders pass away. But the structures that money built remain standing, quietly dictating the flow of the future. You don't actually need to own the original company anymore if you have quietly shaped the world around it, making your power almost invisible, but profoundly enduring. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. Next time you're out, look at the institutions around you, the hospitals, the universities, the research centers. How much of your world is secretly shaped by the invisible, enduring power of private wealth? It's a fascinating question, isn't it? And it's one the Rockefeller legacy challenges us all to ask.